Think about yesterday for a second. Where is it now? It definitely happened. You spoke to people. You thought about things. You made decisions. But right now, yesterday is gone. So where did all of it go? Most of us would probably say it exists only in our memories. But there's an idea that says maybe that's not entirely true. Maybe what happens doesn't completely disappear. Maybe somehow a record remains. Today, we call one version of that idea the Akashic Records. The easiest way to understand the Akashic Records is to imagine that the universe itself has something like a memory, a record of events, experiences, and people's lives. Some believers say it goes even further, that thoughts, intentions, and information about our individual lives can somehow be preserved there. And some people believe this record can actually be accessed. Now, that's obviously a pretty big claim, but what's interesting is that the modern Akashic Records aren't really where this story begins. To understand how we got here, we have to go back much further, to ancient India. In Hindu tradition, there's a figure called Chitragupta. According to texts including the Garuda Purana, Chitragupta works alongside Yama, the god associated with death and justice, and his job is quite unusual. He keeps an account of people's actions, the good things you've done, the bad things you've done, things that may have happened decades ago, things that maybe even you don't remember anymore. Tradition associates this record with a register called the Agrasanthin. And whether you understand that story literally, spiritually, or symbolically, there's an interesting idea underneath it. An action happens, the moment passes, but the action remains recorded, and Indian philosophy gives us another idea that's different, but strangely interesting when placed beside this one, Chitta. Very simply, you can think of Chitta as the mind field. In Indian philosophical traditions such as yoga, experiences can leave behind impressions in the mind. The experience itself might last a few seconds, but the impression it creates can remain for years. It can become a memory. It can affect how you think. It can even influence what you do next. So now we have two different ideas. In one, actions are recorded. In the other, experiences leave impressions. They're not the same thing, but there's a thought connecting them that's worth noticing. Something happens. The moment ends, but something remains. Now, jump forward hundreds of years. By the late 1800s, Western spiritual movements had become increasingly interested in Indian philosophy. One of the most influential was called Theosophy, and among the Sanskrit concepts these thinkers encountered was Akasha, an ancient Indian concept associated with space or ether. Over time, these discussions began to include the idea of an unseen record containing information about events and human experience. And by 1899, Theosophist C.W. Leadbeater, in his book Clairvoyance, was explicitly writing about what he called the Akashic Records. Now the idea had become much bigger. It wasn't just that your actions or experiences left something behind. The suggestion was that reality itself might somehow preserve information. And once you believe a record like that exists, there's an obvious next question: can anyone read it? A few years later, Austrian thinker Rudolf Steiner claimed something along those lines. He wrote about what he called the Akasha Chronicle. Steiner believed that through spiritual perception, it was possible to access information about the past that wasn't available through ordinary historical records. But perhaps the most famous person associated with this idea came later. His name was Edgar Cayce. Cayce was an American who became famous for entering what appeared to be a sleep-like trance and giving what became known as readings. More than 14,000 readings associated with Cayce were documented by the organization that preserves his work. And when Cayce discussed where some of his information supposedly came from, he identified two sources. One was the subconscious. The other was the Akashic Records. He sometimes connected them with the idea of a book of life, a record associated with an individual's thoughts and actions. Now, 14,000 documented readings sounds impressive, but there's an important distinction here. Documenting that someone gave a reading doesn't prove where the information in that reading actually came from. Steiner describing spiritual experiences doesn't prove that an Akashic Chronicle objectively exists either. And that's the problem we keep running into. People have claimed to experience or access something like the Akashic Records, but we still don't have established scientific evidence demonstrating that such a universal record actually exists. And that's where you might think this story ends. Except it doesn't. Because much later, someone tried to bring a surprisingly similar idea closer to the language of science. Hungarian systems theorist and philosopher Ervin László proposed something he called the Akashic Field. He even wrote a book called Science and the Akashic Field. László proposed that the universe might contain a fundamental field capable of preserving and transmitting information. In other words, something a little like a memory built into reality itself. But again, we need to be careful. László proposed an idea. He did not experimentally prove the existence of the spiritual Akashic records, and the Akashic field is not established physics. But now, look at the journey we've just taken. In ancient Indian tradition, Chitragupta keeps a record of human actions. In Indian philosophy, experiences can leave impressions within Chitta. Centuries later, Theosophists begin describing Akashic records. Steiner talks about an Akasha Chronicle that he believes can be accessed. Cayce gives thousands of readings and attributes some of his information to the Akashic records. And much later, László proposes an information field built into reality. Now, these ideas are separated by centuries. They come from very different traditions, and they definitely aren't identical. Later thinkers were also influenced by earlier ideas, so we can't pretend that all of these concepts appeared independently. But still, there's a thought that keeps showing up. What happens may leave something behind. So what exactly are we looking at? Maybe we've taken completely different ideas and connected them because they happen to sound similar. Maybe the modern Akashic records are simply a newer belief built from much older ideas. Or maybe people separated by hundreds, even thousands of years were trying to describe something similar, using completely different words. We don't know. And maybe that's where we should leave it. Think about yesterday again. Yesterday happened. Now it's gone. But is everything about it really gone? Or does something, somewhere, remain? What do you think?